Hi, I'm Chris Haigh and this is the Fiddle channel, and today we're going to play Lover Come Back to Me. Lover Come Back to Me was a request from Minder, one of my supporters on Patreon. This is a tune from 1928 by Oscar Hammerstein and Sigmund Romberg. And there's a recording of this by Stefan Grappelli from his Violinspiration album, which he did with Diz Disley back in the 70s. And Diz Disley was a guitarist and band leader, and occasionally I used to do gigs with him, and very entertaining he was too. I'm going to show you a very simple version of the melody. I'm going to show you roughly how the melody was played by Grappelli on that recording, and I'm going to take some of the licks from his solo and show you how you can use those to create your own solo. So, as is very often the case, the basics of this melody are very simple and potentially quite boring, but I'm going to show you them anyway. So this is kind of the skeleton of the melody, and it's very useful to know the skeleton of any of these melodies. I'll play it in fact with the backing straight away because it's so straightforward. Section. So, it's really good to know that, but you've definitely got to work on it and develop it. So, the way Grappelli approaches this, he uses more or less the same, instead of playing that, he usually does 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So, instead of coming in on the second beat, he comes in on the second half beat. So 1, and he extends that note. And instead of one long note, he does. So he does that quite a few times. So the A section he plays like this. And notice I'm doing a big dig on the emphasized notes. And then he uses some quarter note triplets. 1, 2, and again. Quarter note triplets is very useful for medium tempo tunes. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. If you're not sure how to count a quarter note triplets, and it may just come naturally, but you may have to think about it quite a lot. I do have a video on this which explains how to count those. So the A and B section, or the A repeat rather, are pretty straightforward. And then quarter note triplets again. That's an interesting phrase. So we got A flat there. So here we're doing a diminished scale. So a diminished scale is made up of a stack of minor thirds. A flat, B natural, D, F natural. And I'm going to show you some licks at the end which develop on this idea. Then the Grappelli, a last A section. So that is pretty much the same as it was in the A section. Then we've got a lovely and very typical swoop down. And I think it might be worth learning this as part of your melody. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the most important thing about that is that bit, right at the beginning of the phrase. And then I suspect Grappelli would, every time he did this, use a slightly different way of getting down the scale. That's a simpler approach, using a more consistent pattern. He tends not to do, when he's doing long runs, he doesn't use simple consistent patterns very much. He kind of twists them around a bit. But yeah, I've either learned that exactly as written, or else learn a more consistent thing. Something like that. That's a lot easier then to use in other places. Okay, so let's do all of the Grappelli melody with the backing. Just one more thing about the melody. It's all pretty much in the top quarter, and those the ends of each of those phrases, they start really fairly intense, and then you lift the second finger off so that it ends in a whistle like that. Okay, now I went through the solo that Grappelli played and just picked out some of the more useful licks. There's a common discussion among jazz musicians as to the value of transcribing whole solos, and whereas probably 90% of jazz teachers think it's a great idea, I think it's a terrible idea. When you transcribe a whole solo and learn it, all you can do with that really is to reproduce it with that tune in that key. Whereas if you take the individual licks, the best licks of that solo, then you can use those in any tune, in any key. And that's far more useful in my opinion. Gives you much more flexibility. So I've picked out some useful licks which we will relate to certain parts of the sequence. So I mentioned the diminished lick, and if you look at the chord sequence, there are quite a few. There are no diminished chords, but what there are quite a few minor 7 flat 5s. So a B minor 7 flat 5 is a root, third, flattened fifth, and so that can very readily be played as a B diminished. And if you're not familiar with them, but diminished scales or chords are based on just a whole load of minor thirds. So every interval is a minor third, which means that it's kind of a symmetrical chord. So a B diminished is also exactly the same as a D diminished, which is the same as an F diminished, which is the same as an A flat diminished. Which means that there are actually only 3 diminished chords. So there's not a huge amount of learning to do, but you do have to learn the fingering of each of them, of each of these 3 shapes. So each of those is different, so you have to learn those. So every time there's a minor 7 flat 5, so there are B minor 7 flat 5s, G7 flat 5s, and E minor 7 flat 5s. I think there may be an A minor 7 flat 5 as well. So whenever you see one of those, you can do a diminished lick. And a few common diminished licks, for example, an E minor 7, using chain bowing, so we're descending from the E. A G minor 7, which is the same as the E minor 7. That's a useful one. So it's going down in triplets. It may take you a week to learn that, but you'll find it very useful whenever one of these chords crops up. A B minor 7 flat 5. Just a simple descending thing. A minor 7 flat 5. And that's using quarter note triplets. Da boo boo ba boo boo ba boo boo bam. Sometimes you can use just a small part of the scale, like as part of for a B minor 7 flat 5, and he uses that at least once. So let's go through the melody before we go to any of the other licks, and just try and slip in some of these things whenever one of those diminished comes up. Here's the bridge. So eventually you'll be able to do that by ear. Whenever you hear a minor 7 flat 5, then you'll be able to immediately drop in one of those diminished licks. And incidentally, the minor 7 flat 5 is very often paired with a 7 flat 9. And basically those two chords, minor 7 flat 5, 7 flat 9, are part of the same scale. So whenever you start one, probably the next chord is going to be that 7 flat 9, and it's going to fit in perfectly well. Okay, the other licks I've got are minor, D minor licks. 1, 2. It's a parallel fifths lick and a chromatic slide. So the melody is going. But because your finger is across both strings, we're playing that. Another one he does. This is great for any extended D minor. And then we've got another variation on the descending, the long descending line. Again, 3, 4. So let's go through and see if we can drop some of those into the chord sequence. Comes the bridge. And so on. So that's it. Try and memorize the chord sequence. If not, you're going to be reading the chords. But try and memorize, certainly memorize the licks, and try and fit those in whenever is appropriate. And quite often you'll be able to hear when it's going to work, and if you put it in, it'll often, you can kind of bluff it even if the chords aren't exactly what you expect them to be. Anyway, hope you found this useful. If you would like a copy of the sheet music to this lesson, do subscribe to the channel, send me an email, I will send you a free PDF. And if you'd like to help me keep these videos keep coming, do please consider joining me on Patreon, where all of my PDFs are sitting waiting for you, along with all the backing tracks and lots of other goodies as well. Thank you for watching, see you again soon.